Hello, everyone. My name is Jason Castleberry, and we are going to cover one of my favorite books. It is the Book of Esther. Esther is a book that has been surrounded in a lot of controversy. In fact, it was one of the most debated books of the Old Testament as to whether it should have been included in the canon. So today we're going to cover this subject and cover the Book of Esther and give you an overview of what this book is about. So we're going to cover the controversy surrounding the book, the possible authors of the book, the time period in which the book covers and when it was written, the structure outline, the main characters of the book, and discuss the plot of the book. Some controversy surrounding the book. First one, and one of the biggest ones, is that it never mentions the word God in it. It is the only book in the Bible that does not mention the word God by name. And so some have suggested that the name of God is present in an encoded form, specifically in the acrostics in the book. It is proposed that the name was hidden in this way due to political tensions that existed at the time, while others have suggested that it was omitted because God rescued the Jews but did not approve of some of the intermarriage with pagans and implied unnecessary violence that you read within the book. There's also another possible explanation that considers one of the main purposes of the book, that God is working behind the scenes without revealing himself directly to those through whom he is working. This is also a more common experience for most believers in our age. It's also the only book not found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and that could have been by accident, or the copies that they may have had just did not get preserved through history. Also, the story of Esther was about a woman, and the community of Qumran was mainly male. And the book was certainly not considered authoritative within the Qumran community. They did not participate in the festival of Purim that is outlined in Esther chapter 9. So there's a few reasons that that may have occurred. The book of Esther also does not quote other scripture and is not quoted by other scripture. If you read through the Bible, you'll see in many cases, and in every book, you will see that scripture is quoted within each of the books. And so you see that Jesus quotes Old Testament scripture. You see other Old Testament books quote the Torah, but you don't see any of that with Esther. It also created a new feast, the Feast of Purim, was created and celebrated God's deliverance during the time of Esther. And many may have found this offensive, that the issue of that Moses' feast, the Passover, and the other feasts were not enough, so there was another feast. So that could have been a controversial element to it. In addition, there's 107 additional verses added to the Greek version compared to the Hebrew version. And when you look at extra biblical documents, especially like Persian historical documents, you don't see the words Vashti or Esther. So the queens that are mentioned in this book is not mentioned in historical documents. And so many will call into question the historical authenticity of this book. So who wrote the book? Well, according to Jewish tradition in the Talmud, the book was written by the men of the Great Synagogue. And it is reputed that the Great Synagogue was responsible not only for Esther, but also for the book of Ezekiel. Now, there is question marks regarding the Great Synagogue because there's no specific reference to such a council within biblical texts. It's possible that it did exist, but then again, it's possible that that did not exist. Now, Josephus, the Jewish historian, after the time of Jesus, attributed the book to Mordecai. Now, this is perhaps based on references to Mordecai recording the events and sending letters to all the Jews. Though the problem seems unlikely to have been written by Mordecai, considering the lavish praise that is given to him throughout the book. So it's very well possible that this book could have been written by someone else. It could have been possibly Ezra, Nehemiah, somebody that may have come in later. But we don't know, and so it's best that we leave the author as unknown. Now, the setting of the book, it's set during the period of King Xerxes, and King Xerxes was the son of Darius the First. And by this time, the Persian Empire had gained control of Israel by defeating the Babylonians, and the book was most likely written towards the end of the 5th century BC or possibly the beginning of the 4th century BC. And that's because there were some key dates indicated within the text, and the first date recorded in the book was the 3rd year of Xerxes, which was around 483 BC. There are some other dates that are indicated throughout the scripture. Esther's appearance before the king occurred around the 478 BC time frame. And also the last date of the book is the king's edict for the Jews to destroy their opposition, which is in 473 BC, which is referred to in chapter 9. And so that gives us an idea of roughly when it was written and what time frame it. And here's the basic outline of the book. The first 2 chapters will give you a basic background of the situation that's going on. In chapter 1, you will see the banquet that King Xerxes is given in order to garner support for his kingdom, that he is getting ready to attack the Greeks, and so he's trying to garner support. And you see that Vashti refuses to attend that banquet, and he deposes of Vashti. And then in chapter 2, you see the search for a new queen, and Esther comes into the picture. And then in chapter 3, you see the crisis. You see Haman plot to destroy the Jews. You will then see in chapters 4 through 8 the resolution, and Mordecai comes into the picture where he is so distraught that he is in ash and sackcloth, and Esther and Mordecai come together to foil the plot that Haman has started. And then you'll see in chapters 9 and 10, you'll see the conclusion and what has happened with the plot that has occurred against the Jews. And so that is your basic outline for the book of Esther. Now let's look at the main characters in the book. King Xerxes, who is the king in the book of Esther, ruled from 486 to 465 BC and is the son of Darius the First. He is identified in the book by his Hebrew name Ahasuerus, but he is the same king that faced 300 Spartans and King Leonidas in the Battle of Thermopylae. He was also assassinated by his own advisor later on. Then we have Haman, who is an Agagite, and his name means illustrious or magnificent. And if you know your Old Testament history, the Agagites were descended from King Agag, who was killed by the Hebrews in King Saul's time. He was a principal advisor to the king, and in this story, he is the evil villain. We also see Queen Vashti introduced into the story in chapter 1. She would be deposed by the king for refusing to attend his party. And many today will see her as the first feminist of the Bible for her refusal to parade herself in front of the drunken men in chapter 1. We then have Mordecai, who is a Jew from the tribe of Benjamin, and also the uncle to Esther. He is also the one who foils a plot to kill the king. And then he's also the one who urges Esther to intervene on the behalf of the Jews. And then finally we have Esther. And many will debate whether she's the main character or Mordecai's the main character. But she becomes queen after finding favor with the king. And then she will take great risks to intervene on the behalf of the Jews. So the plot of the story. So it starts off in chapter 1 where King Xerxes throws a banquet to garner support for the war that he is about to wage with the Greeks. And in his drunken stupor, he deposes of Queen Vashti after she refuses the king's order to appear at the banquet. So a new edict goes out and a new queen is to be selected. And through favor with the king, Esther is the one that is selected. But we have Haman who comes into the picture, and he gets angry that Mordecai will not bow down to him, being in such a high position that he was in. And so he plots to kill the Jews by tricking the king to write an edict that will basically annihilate them. But that plot is foiled by Mordecai, who, upon hearing of this plot, grieves deeply, goes in, wears sackcloth and ash, and word gets to Esther about this plot. And so through Mordecai, she works to garner favor with the king by hosting multiple banquets in which she invites the king and Haman to. And so eventually what comes out is she tells the king of this plot that she is to be destroyed along with her people. And so the king then calls for Haman to be killed. And so, but that doesn't stop the plot, right? The king's edict must go on, and so then the king issues a new edict that the Jews are able to defend themselves. And so eventually the Jews are saved, and they create a feast to celebrate the deliverance from this plot. And so you see a lot of plot twists and turns within this story. But the theme of the book is that God is at work in the world even when his presence is not felt. And God providentially cares for and preserves his people during the times of trials and persecutions. And even though the word God is not mentioned, you will see the presence of God is all throughout this book. And so it should make you think to yourself, what is a coincidence versus what is divine intervention? And if you look at the story from really chapter 1 all the way through the end, you can see that God's hand is all throughout this book, and his hands are at work to save the Jewish people and protect them, even though he's not present and they are in an exile situation. So it's a wonderful book that should really make you consider and think about your life as a Christian. Are we mentioning the word God in our daily lives? We see it not mentioned in the Book of Esther, but are we not mentioning it also? Is it a microcosm of our lives? Has God been at work in your life? Have you gone down those left-hand turns at times in your lives? Not sure why, but you just made that decision, and it led you to the point where you're at today. I have a friend of mine that made a really good observation, and our lives today are a culmination of the decisions that we have made in the past. But those decisions have come from possibly divine intervention. So you should really think about your life and where you're at in your life and how you got there and how much of it was a divine intervention. So it's a wonderfully written book. I hope you will read it and think about it and ponder how it applies to you as a Christian.